Today I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview and a brief introduction to Seoul's public transportation system. Colored a little bit by some trivia I picked up and some of my own experience using it over the years. But fair warning, this is not a tutorial. I'm not going to teach you how to buy subway tickets or how to use the bus system. There are plenty of videos and websites out there that do that, and I'll link some of them in the description below. I will, however, give you some suggestions for some apps that you can make use of if you ever make it to Seoul. So stick around. I am at Seoul Station on the platform for the Seoul Subway Line 1. And this is one of the oldest subway stations in Seoul. Line 1 opened in 1974, in August 15th, I think it was, and it ran at the time, it was just a segment that ran between Seoul Station and Cheongnyangni Station. And over the years, Line 1 expanded and new lines opened and were extended, and the network just grew and grew and grew. When I first got here, there were 4 lines 1 through 4. And today, there are a total of 23, 9 numbered lines, 1 through 9, plus 2 numbered lines in Incheon. And the remaining, 12 are named lines. It's a huge network, has massive coverage of the city. It's a very nice system. It's clean, it's safe, it's convenient, and it's pretty efficient too, actually. And they've added a lot of extra features over the years, like these security doors here that protect you from falling onto the platform. You can see over here, they're open into the subway car. Those weren't installed when I first got here. And you have these monitors up above that tell you what's coming. The passenger information systems, all of that stuff was added, probably in the 2000s. I don't think we had them in the 90s. Yeah, this is a fantastic subway system. The one thing I don't like about Line 1 is the trains are going the wrong way. You see, it's going to the right. And I say that's the wrong way because it's not the same way the trains go on the other lines. On the other lines, when you're in the middle, the trains are always running to your left. But on Line 1, they're always running to your right. And that has gotten me discombobulated more than once. When you ride the subway as often as I have, and you get this mental map in your head of the top surface level and where things are above ground and where you are below ground, you just think in terms of, I need to go in that direction, and every other line you're going to go to the left when you're in the middle. But here, nope, got to go to the right, and I have more than once gotten on the wrong side. So yeah. Now, these machines behind me are ticket vending machines, and if you're visiting Seoul, I would advise you just to ignore them, at least for the ticket function, because the tickets you buy here are only usable on the subway. So if you're riding the subway and plan to transfer to a bus, well, you got to pay extra for the bus then. And also you'll have to pay cash on the bus if the bus even has a cash box. Some of the buses these days do not have cash boxes. I know the city wants to move away from those eventually because they cost too much money to maintain, and a very, very, very small percentage of passengers use them. So if you're here 2 or 3 days, don't plan to use public transportation a lot, maybe a couple trips on the subway, okay, fine, go ahead and get your tickets here. But you got to go through the process of finding the stations you want to go to and some other stuff, and then when you get off at the other end, you have to take you don't have to, but you can take your card to a refund machine, put the card in and get 500 won back from what you paid, because you put a 500 won deposit on the the ticket. So really these things aren't as useful for people who are making multiple trips on the subway or plan to use the subway and the bus. In that case, you want to buy a Tmoney card, or Cashbee is another option. In addition to subway and bus and taxi, you can use Tmoney in convenience stores and in some other businesses also. Just look for the little Tmoney symbol on the somewhere, around the payment area, and you'll be able to use it there. But what I would recommend is that if you're traveling, if you have a budget for transportation, get yourself a Tmoney card. They cost 3,000 won. Just go into a convenience store, get the card, top it off with your transportation budget, the amount of your transportation budget. Now, you can buy it with a credit card, but you have to top it off with cash. They don't accept credit cards to top it off. Whether you're those ticket vending machines that I showed you, you can top the card off there. So at the subway station, you can top it off. If you're outside, you can top it off at a convenience store, but you have to use cash. So yeah, take your budget for transportation, put that on the Tmoney card, and use it while you're here. Just pay attention every time you tap it to how much you've got remaining. And remember, you have to tap on and tap off the bus, tap in and tap out of the subway, And when you're ready to go, you can take to leave Korea, or when you're finished with the card or whatever, you can take your Tmoney card to a convenience store and get a refund. They'll give you whatever amount is remaining on the card minus 500 won as a service fee. The 500 won these days is about 40 cents, which isn't bad, I think. The biggest benefit of using Tmoney or Cashbee is the discount you get on the fare. If you use Tmoney or Cashbee, you get 100 won discounts. Multiple trips are going to save you some money, right? 10 trips, you've saved 1,000 won. But the bigger savings comes when you transfer, and you have a 30-minute window when you're moving from bus to subway or subway to bus. You have this 30-minute window to tap in. And this is why it's important to tap out on the bus. On the subway, you have to tap out to get out, but on the bus, you're not required to tap out. The door will open and you can just walk right on out. But if you don't tap out and then you go to get on the subway, you're not going to get the benefit of the transfer discount. So make sure you always tap out on the bus. And then you'll only pay, I believe it's 100 to 400 won, depending on the distance you're traveling. So again, a 30-minute window, when you make the transfer, you'll only pay 100 to 400 won. But if you go beyond 30 minutes, you're not going to get that discount. There's a great little video here on YouTube that has an animation of the growth of the Seoul subway network from 1974 to 2021. And I'll leave a link to it in the description for you if you want to watch it. And I recommend you do. It's pretty cool to see just how it developed. Now you cannot use your credit card on a bus or the subway. Korean credit cards work if they've been set up for it. When I got mine, I had to tick a checkbox to say if I wanted the transportation function or not. And so with that, I can just tap in and out with the credit card. Now they do work with taxis. You can use your credit card on taxis. So that's why, you might want to use your credit card instead of Tmoney for a taxi. But now I am at what they call a median bus stop, a center lane bus stop. This is an evolution of the bus network in Seoul that was a really positive development. Back when I first got here, there were no bus lanes. All the buses were diesel. And oh my goodness, let me tell you, the black gunk that came out of those buses. I had a moped for a while, and when I was riding down the street, if I had the face mask up on my helmet, then when I got back home, took off my helmet, I'd have a big black square around my face. And I'm not going to tell you what happened when I blew my nose, but yeah, it was pretty nasty back then. 2004, they implemented bus lanes, but that was also around the time that they were transitioning away from diesel to LPG, liquid petroleum gas. And back in the 90s, the traffic was so bad that, you know, riding a bus just wasn't worth it. And I avoided them most of the time, except early in the morning before morning rush hour or late at night after the evening rush hour. Even during the middle of the day, traffic was, you know, hit or miss. And you could never predict how long it would take you to get where you're going on the bus. And when they first implemented the bus lanes, they implemented them on the right side of the road. So the right lane of the major roads was reserved for buses during most of the day. And they were marked by a blue line. And that's now the blue line they have on the center. But traffic was really, really bad back then. And having the bus lanes on the right didn't do anything to improve the flow of bus traffic, because people were stopping to let people in and out of their cars, right? Taxis or whatever. And people were in the right lane turning right. And, you know, it was still a pain to take a bus. It was completely unpredictable how long it would take you to get anywhere. And the bus drivers, you know, they were on really tight schedules. And I don't know what kind of penalties they suffered from, you know, going too far over their schedules, but they drove like maniacs. Oh my gosh, when there was no traffic, it felt sometimes like we were cattle in a cattle car. And the worst part was sometimes if they had room to, you know, really get going, they would just blow right by a bus stop. I used to live near a tunnel that goes under Namsan, and in the mornings, early in the morning, I would wait for the bus at a bus stop right outside the tunnel. And the buses coming through that tunnel, you know, they had picked up speed and they were just coming right on, you know, vroom, and just go right past the bus stop and leave me standing there. That happened more times than I can count. And my wife frequently called the bus company to complain, and nothing ever changed. Now, once the new bus system got implemented and we got these newer buses, everything changed. And, you know, now it's a much nicer experience to ride the bus than it used to be. They don't drive like maniacs. They don't throw you around usually. I mean, you still occasionally encounter one of those guys, but I've never been left at the bus stop under the revised system. And these days I'm starting to see more electric buses. They're starting to roll those out now. And from what I understand, hydrogen fuel cell buses, I believe they're called. So they're trying to get greener. From what I've been able to find out so far, the first bus line started service in Seoul in 1928, but the first taxi service was in operation from 1918. And that's pretty wild, if true. I never would have expected that it had started that early in Korea. And the really interesting thing is, for a while, the taxi service in Korea was mostly based around used US Army Jeeps. That is pretty cool. Yeah, after World War II, there were some used US Army Jeeps in Korea, and more of them during the, or after the Korean War. And so for a while, yeah, they were using used US Army Jeeps for the taxi service. But by 1955, the number of taxis on the street had increased pretty dramatically, from what I understand, over what they were prior to the Korean War. And from then on, you know, it just developed and grew and became regulated and eventually became the service that we have today. Now, taxis today are much nicer, much better than they used to be. And the base fare today is 4,800 won, so they're not as cheap as they used to be. And it escalates pretty quickly from there. I'm frequently surprised when I get to a destination in a taxi to see what the meter reads. But as far as the experience, it's a much, much nicer experience than it used to be. Back in the 90s, I'll tell you what, taxi drivers, they would scam you, they would run double fares, they would refuse to pick you up. I mean, I think I mentioned in a previous video when I was talking about Itaewon that there was a curfew on the bars where the bars had to close down between midnight and 4 a.m. And sometimes I would be with friends around Gangnam Station and the bars would all close at midnight. And the bars there actually did kick us out. And we would then want to go to Itaewon to go into the back door of some of the bars that, you know, let people in during the curfew hours. And there would be a long line of people standing on the side of the street. I'm talking dozens of people. I mean, it's a huge crowd, right? And many empty taxis coming by, stopping again and again while people would bend over and shout their destination into the window. And when the taxi driver heard a destination that he was willing to drive to, usually one that was far away, he would stop, unlock the doors, and let the person in, because they kept the doors locked just so you couldn't jump in. And because the distance from Gangnam Station to Itaewon was so short, they would never want to pick me up. I mean, I'm leaning, Itaewon, Itaewon, Itaewon. Yeah, it took forever to get a cab there. And yeah, I've got some stories about that, but this isn't the place to tell them. So the way to catch a taxi on the street is pretty much like you do it anywhere else in the world, but you just got to look for the red characters on the front, on the top of the window that says bincha. Bincha, literally that just means empty car. And so when you flag them down, just raise your hand up and do it like this, right? Don't wave, you know, just do it like this. That's Korean style of come here. That's how you call people over or flag a taxi down. Now, if you see a green characters at the top of the window that say 예약, that means the taxi is reserved. Somebody used an app to call that taxi, and you're not going to be able to take that one. So look for the red characters that say bincha. Now, I have seen some taxis, confusingly, that have 예약 in red instead of green. So you can't always rely on the color alone. Now, most of the time, that is the distinction. Red means it's empty, green means it's reserved, which seems backwards, right? But pay attention to the characters. If you're going to take a taxi, try to learn those characters. bincha is empty and 예약 is reserved. The last thing I want to talk about today is apps. Somebody asked in a comment on one of my earlier videos if I could do a video talking about how to get around Seoul because Google Maps doesn't work. And what that means is, you know, I mean, the map works, it's there, you just can't, you know, generate any routes from it. You can't say, you know, how do I get from point A to point B and have it generate a route. I never use map apps that way. Even when I travel to other cities, I don't tend to use the maps for directions. I just eyeball it, you know, I just find my destination and find where I am now and eyeball the streets to get there. And, you know, it's not the most efficient way probably. The map app could probably find a quicker route for me, but that's just how I do it usually. So I don't have a lot of experience with apps to do that, right? But I do know, you know, a lot of people use Naver Maps. You can generate routes with that. My wife used that. My wife uses that. There's also Kakao Map, which is another option. And I have both of them installed on my phone. I don't use Kakao Map that often these days. I usually use Naver Map. Again, I don't generate routes with it. I just eyeball it and that works for me. But I have used an app called Citymapper to follow routes before, and I really like Citymapper, and I've used it in London, and I've played with it here in Seoul. I don't use it in Seoul, but I've played with it here. But yeah, in London, I have used Citymapper to, get the walking routes and the subway lines I need to take and all of that. And in fact, I pretty much relied on Citymapper on our last trip to London to figure out my way around the subway lines. So yeah, I would recommend Citymapper just because I have experience with it, and it seems to be pretty accurate. But you also have options for the subway and the bus system here. Kakao Bus is a good option to figure out the bus routes. Like you can be in your hotel, and if there's a bus stop outside your house, outside the hotel, you can click on the bus stop on the Kakao Bus app, and it'll tell you which buses are coming, how far away they are. You can check the full bus route and all that. So that's a useful app to have. Kakao Metro is another one. That's the one I use for the subway. There are parts of the subway system I'm no longer familiar with, but even for the parts that I do know, I still use Kakao Metro sometimes, because to give me a sense of how much time it's going to take, and which doors I should get on the subway train that are closest to the exit and such. So that's pretty useful. There's also an app called Seoul Metro that I used in the past, which is pretty good, and it's a good alternative. So those are some options to consider when you're coming here. But yeah, I think if you have Citymapper installed, you probably won't need anything else just to figure out the routes. Yeah, that should handle everything for you pretty well. All right, if you're planning on coming to Korea, I hope that you found something a little bit useful in this video. I will leave links in the description down below so that you can find more useful information, some details on how to use the subway system and the bus system, and buy Tmoney cards and all the details that you need to know about them. I'll also leave a link to that video I mentioned earlier with the animation of the development of the Seoul subway system. And even if you're not planning to come to Korea, I hope you could take away some interesting tidbits of trivia from this vlog. And I am done. I'm gonna go back home and edit this video. Tomorrow morning I have to get up early, and I've got a meeting at 1 a.m. because that's the way it works for me. I'm the only one in the group I work for who's in Asia. Everybody else is in Europe and the States, mostly on the West Coast. So we end up having our meetings at midnight or 1 a.m. my time. So I will have my 1 a.m. meeting, and we'll probably finish around 2:30. And then if I do go to sleep, I'm gonna have to get up at 6 to go to the bus terminal, because I've got to head down to Chungju on a 7 o'clock bus and spend the day, the Lunar New Year's Day with the family there. And then I'll be back on a bus to Seoul in the evening. I don't expect any traffic going down there, but there will probably be quite a bit on the way back. So, happy Lunar New Year to you. And even if you don't celebrate it, I hope you have a happy weekend. Can't even talk. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.